Big thanks to Into the AM for helping to support my channel. Use my coupon code RISTER or any of my affiliate links for an additional 10% off of any order. You'll be supporting my channel when you do. Once again, thanks to Into the AM for helping me bring this content to you. For as long as Smash Bros has been played competitively, the debate around stages has existed. Which stages are legal? Which are banned? How do we decide all of this? Who gets to decide it? Should we just go no items, Fox only, final destination for every game? For a lot of Smash games, these questions have been pretty ironed out. Melee's stage list has remained consistent for a while now, and every quirk has been mostly ironed out. The 64 community just plays on Dreamland, for example. But for Ultimate, this question has been tearing the community apart. For the most part, Europe has gotten their act together, and they have a semi-unified stage list across nearly the entire continent. It has some questionable choices, like including Yoshi's, but for the most part, it seems as though Europe is happy with their choices. Japan is a little more contentious, but for the most part, it at least seems as if every major tournament series has settled on their own stage list. But for North America, and especially America itself, we've had a really hard time coming up with our own stage list. Pretty much every region in the US has their own, save for the one example of the Midwest Unified Stage List. Now, we will be talking about the Midwest Unified Stage List a lot later on, so just trust me when I say that Midwest Unified is perhaps the closest thing the USA has to a unified stage list, since over half of the states in the US are at least partially using this rule set. But yesterday, something interesting happened. A new contender came into the ring, claiming that they'd created the definitive rule set for Smash Bros. Ultimate, to be used across all of North America. And they had the backing of Smash's biggest organization, Lumirank. Today, we'll be going over this proposed unified NA stage list, talking about it in depth, and most importantly, comparing it to its biggest competition, Midwest Unified. But first, I have to give out a lot of disclaimers about this rule set. First things first, a lot of people have been pushing the narrative that Lumirank is overextending, that they're trying to take control of the entire community, and they've got to be stopped before they control our entire lives and tell us what we can or can't do. Well, okay, I know that the Smash community, especially in the US, hate central authority, but hold your horses for a moment. The team responsible behind this rule set wasn't the Lumirank team. The team of statisticians that handle the rankings was not done by the same people. As far as I can tell, Luminosity / Lumirank's sole influence in the entire project was just giving it their blessing and allowing it to be put on their Twitter, giving it a massive boost in exposure and support. Because after all, there's likely a large part of the Smash community that will support this rule set now because, well, it's the Luminosity rule set. And many people view Lumirank / Luminosity as the central authority for Smash Ultimate these days. Again, that sentiment is not universal, especially by anyone still scarred by the whole Panda collapse thing. But that's not representative of the whole. There's a lot of people who would gladly just assert that Lumirank is the Smash authority, and a lot of people who would rather die before recognizing them. All of this regardless of whether or not Lumirank / Luminosity ever intends to become something like the next Panda. Instead, Lumirank put their support behind a group of people that were behind this project instead of working on it themselves. That group was actually led by someone you probably recognize, Dakpo, the Diddy player / coach. And while there were countless people involved with this project, the other most influential members include Ray Jackson, a NorCal TO who's responsible for bringing you tournaments like Genesis and Watch the Throne, another Ray, spelled differently, responsible for bringing you Diamond Dust, and Captain L, the Canadian Sheik. These 4 members were the key people in bringing you this rule set, not the Lumirank team themselves. I just wanted to clear up that misconception so that we're perfectly clear in who we're directing our responses to. Oh, and needless to say, even if you think this rule set is hot garbage, let's try our best to keep everything civil and respectfully disagree and give criticism, instead of blindly screaming at people who are literally doing this purely as a hobby. Okay? Okay. Also, one more disclaimer I want to get out of the way is that the team behind this rule set is not trying to force anyone to use it. Many people are worried that the support of Lumirank is basically the team trying to strong-arm TOs into adopting this rule set, but that's not really accurate. Now, I'm sure the team would love it if everyone just adopted it without question, but what they really want is just for everyone to try it out. As they said in their statement, there's no enforcements or punishments. It's not like your tournament won't be counted for the rankings if you don't use the rule set. They just want TOs to try it out and see how they like it. This also isn't meant to be a final draft per se. The idea, as far as I understand it, is that everyone will go off, use this rule set, and come back after a few weeks and give feedback on it. Then it can be revised and reshipped, rinse and repeat a few times until we finally get our perfect rule set. Now, that's what the team wants to have happen. But in all honesty, I think the people who don't like this rule set already will probably refuse to even try it out. And you could even say that this plan is naive to a degree, and I wouldn't necessarily say you're wrong. I'm just bringing this up now to define the team's intentions. They're not trying to force the community to use this rule set by using the influence of LumiRank. It is meant to cause discussion and draw forward critique, so that we can all improve upon it. Whether or not that'll actually work remains to be seen, but it's important to define their motivations now so that we don't get any misconceptions about them later on in the video. Now, with that said, let's finally take a look at the LumiRank supported Unified NA rule set and see what they're proposing. Let's not beat around the bush. This is it, in its entirety. Now, everyone's eyes are likely gravitating towards the stages right now, but if I may, allow me to pull your attention down into the corner at this rules segment, because this is where some of the most crucial context for this rule set lies. First, we've got some standard rules. 3 stocks, 7 minutes, 1v1 format. All seems to be good. To the right of that, we see something else that's interesting. Declare characters before stage bans, aka character first rule set, meaning that an Nicole Myron situation that we've covered on this channel before won't happen under this rule set, since it's character first and then stage. While this is certainly far from a unanimously agreed upon rule, it's mostly accepted that it's a good one to have for anyone who likes character first, which I believe is most people. The rules listed in this bulleted list is mostly just the process of how to strike stages, in case you don't know how to, and also the procedure for how character first works. That is, however, until we get to the last 2 points on this list. They read, winner bans 2 stages from the full stage list, loser picks the stage, and a player cannot counterpick to the stage they last won on during the set. So what exactly does this mean? In a nutshell, when a game ends, the winner can only ban 2 stages, not 3, which is common in many rule sets, like Midwest Unified, for example. However, for the majority of a BO5 set, 3 stages will still be unavailable because of this second point. This last bullet point is describing MDSR. But some of you may be wondering, what exactly is MDSR? You may have heard of DSR before, but even if you have, you may not know exactly what it means, since most rule sets don't run it, and instead just specify that there isn't any DSR. Well, dear viewers, allow me to give you a rundown. MDSR is a modified version of DSR, which stands for Dave's Stupid Rule. Yes, really, that's actually what it stands for, and no, I don't know who Dave is either. DSR states that if you won on a certain stage in a previous game of a set, you cannot go back to that stage ever again until the set ends. So say for game 1, you and your opponent play Pokemon Stadium 2, and you win. Good for you. Game 2, you go through the bans and you eventually play on Hollow Bastion, and you lose the game, sadly for you. Under DSR, while you do get to pick the next stage you play on, you cannot pick PS2, because you already won on that stage during game 1. In fact, you can't go back to PS2 for the entire rest of the set. Now, your opponent can pick PS2, so there's a chance you can still play on the stage again, but you can't be the one to pick it. MDSR, modified Dave's Stupid Rule, is a slight variation on this that's meant to be less strict. MDSR states that you can't go back to the stage you last won on. So let's go back to our hypothetical. It's the same as before. You won on PS2 during game 1 and lost on Hollow Bastion during game 2. When picking for game 3, you can't pick PS2, since that's the stage you last won on. But here's where things get different. Let's say you play on Town and City for game 3, and you win. And on game 4, you play Smashville and you lose. Now it's game 5, and it's your turn to pick the stage. Under DSR, you wouldn't be able to pick PS2 or Town and City, since you've won on both of those stages at other points during the set. However, under MDSR, the only stage you can't pick in this instance is Town and City, since that's the stage you last won on. You can, however, pick PS2. Even though you won on that stage previously in the set, your most recent win was on Town, so that's the only stage you can't pick for this Game 5. Does that make sense? Great! You now have a comprehensive understanding of how DSR and MDSR works, and for today's purposes, all you really need to know is that the Unified NA rule set supported by LumiRank runs MDSR, while other rule sets, most notably the Midwest Unified rule set, runs absolutely no DSR, meaning that in our hypothetical, you can pick Town and City for that Game 5, since there's no DSR or MDSR in place to prevent you from going to a stage you previously won on. So what does this mean for the Unified NA rule set? This means that, while you can only ban 2 stages after winning a game, in most scenarios, 3 stages will be unavailable anyways. The 2 stages you ban after you win, and the 3rd stage that your opponent can't go back to because they previously won on it. This kind of thing only really comes into effect though in a set that goes back and forth. Going back to our hypothetical, let's say instead of going to a Game 5 that you win the set against your opponent 3-0. Well, DSR or MDSR really never came into play. You won every single game and therefore was never the one picking the stage. Your opponent was. But since they didn't win any games at all, they never even had a stage they previously won on, much less the ability to go back to it. In a nutshell, this means that for any dominant set, there are 2 bans, but for any set that goes back and forth, there are effectively 3, since the stage affected by MDSR isn't available to your opponent. Just remember to keep this in mind when you're banning stages, so that you don't accidentally ban the stage affected by MDSR and therefore waste a ban on a stage that your opponent wasn't able to go back to anyways. Alright, now you fully understand how DSR, MDSR, and stage bans will affect this rule set. Hopefully. That was kind of long-winded. This will provide you with very important context in a minute when we go over the actual stages on this rule set. And by a minute, I mean right now, because that's the next thing we're going over. On the proposed Unified NA rule set, the starter stages are Battlefield, Final Destination, Town and City, Small Battlefield, and Hollow Bastion. And the counterpick stages are Pokemon Stadium 2, Smashville, and Kalos Pokemon League. Now, there are 2 things I want to talk about with this rule set, the problems that people have with it, and why it was created the way it was. Let's start with the problems. For the most part, the actual stages that are included here are perfectly fine. Kalos Pokemon League is a bit contentious for some people, and is by far the most controversial inclusion here, but Kalos is a mainstay for a lot of NA rule sets, including the Midwest Unified stage list. So we're mostly going to pass off the Kalos controversy as personal preference and move on. After all, there is a far bigger issue for a lot of people: the positioning of these stages under a starter or a counterpick. If you didn't know, a starter is a stage that is available at the beginning of a set for the entire set, and counterpick stages are stages you can only pick after Game 1 is finished. There has to be an odd number of starter stages for the sake of striking, which is usually done through a process of rock, paper, scissors, but for counterpicks, there really aren't any limits on how much or how few you can have. Melee, for instance, only has 1 counterpick stage, Pokemon Stadium. Quite ironic that I bring that up though, because the main issue that a lot of people have with this proposed rule set is that PS2, by far the most popular stage within the game, is a counterpick stage, and therefore is not available to begin the set. The other 2 contentious stages are Final Destination and Town and City, both of whom people argue should be counterpicks and not starters. It would be quite easy to adjust too. Just move PS2 and Smashville to starter, and move FD and Town to counterpicks. And voila, right? Well, not exactly. Because I think we should really take an in-depth look at why this stage list is the way it is. In fact, the team involved with it has always maintained that you should really read their reasoning before coming to any dramatic conclusions. I'm not going to read it word for word since it's very lengthy and wordy, but if you do want to read it for yourself, I've linked the original post in the description. For this video's purposes, here's my paraphrasing of the write-up. First things first, this stage list was created by a group of major TOs, high-level players, and coaches. They created this draft of the list, which was then passed off to a panel of 20 North American TOs, 18 of whom ended up voting on it. Since this draft won, it was the final version produced here in this post. The main criteria that was used to create this list was player surveys, polling the community at large and seeing how they felt about stages in general. And overall, it appears as though 2 priorities arose in making this list: variety and avoiding copies. Stage variety was an important factor, because many people have recently complained that it's really boring seeing PS2 as the only stage being played on. This stage list ended up addressing this in multiple ways, one of which was introducing MDSR, which was introduced to encourage playing on a variety of stages throughout a BO5 set. The other way they did this was by making PS2 a counterpick, partly to ensure that you don't play it on game 1. In the end, it was made a counterpick because, according to their survey data, PS2 has one of the lowest audience approval ratings in the game, a data point that was accredited to PS2's ridiculous stage length. And yeah, if you didn't know, PS2 is actually the longest legal stage in the game, being even longer than Town and City, not including platforms. The other main influencing factor is avoiding copy stages. What do I mean by this? Well, it's just a very concise way of saying that the team behind this list put great effort into making sure that two similar stages weren't both a counterpick or both a starter. I'm talking about stages like Hollow Bastion and Smashville, as well as both Small Battlefield and PS2. Now, of course, these stages are very different within their blast zones, but layout-wise are pretty similar. The reasoning here is that if your main struggles on a stage like Smashville, for example, then you probably also want to ban Hollow Bastion. And so, if you had two of them as starter stages, you'd waste both of your two bans getting rid of them. Of course, you'd end up doing this anyways as the set progressed, but for this game 1, where counterpicks aren't available, you can ban a wider variety of stage archetypes: dual plats, triplats, center plats, and flat stages. If you like platforms, for example, you could ban FD and SBF to get rid of all dual plats and flat stages, instead of wasting both bans just to get rid of SBF and PS2. I think there are a few issues with this, mostly that if you really wanted to avoid copies, why are there 3 flat stages in this list? Kalos, FD, and Town and City, all 3 of which essentially function as FDs. Only having 2 bans, even with MDSR, won't always guarantee that you can get rid of the flat stages if your character needs to get rid of them. My other complaint is that I'm not really sure stages like Smashville and Hollow Bastion are as similar as this write-up would suggest. Sure, there's certainly an argument to be made if you don't like the plat layout, but a lot of characters like stages like Smashville because the blast zones are small, or prefer stages like Hollow Bastion for the opposite reason: longer blast zones. A lot of the time, that's more of an influencing factor than the plat layout is. But admittedly, that second part isn't really as big of an issue. Anyways, to continue summarizing the write-up, it went into great detail about why certain stages weren't picked, like Lilat, WarioWare, and hilariously enough, Minecraft World. The driving factor behind these choices was stage length. The panel decided that a length of 160 units was about the average and the preferred choice for most players. This would be stages like Small Battlefield, Final Destination, and Hollow Bastion. The average/preferred height of these stages set at around 180, although this is both a lot more varied and a lot less important. For reference, the smallest legal stage, Smashville, is 139 units, and the longest, PS2, is 187. Non-legal stages have a much more dramatic size difference, like WarioWare sitting at 116 units, and Minecraft World sitting at a whopping 200 units. Interestingly enough, the closeness of the blast zones also played a big part in the approval rating of the stage, with it being the primary reason stages like WarioWare had such a low approval rating. The write-up from here also includes certain other factors we already talked about, like having a unique platform layout for each starter stage, the inclusion of MDSR, and the amount of bans. And that about wraps it up. We've now gone over the entire stage list, the rules that go alongside it, and why it is the way it is. At the bottom of the write-up, there's even a segment that shows the big upcoming tournaments that are using this rule set. It includes the Wave Dash series, the Cirque du CFL series, and most notably, the Supernova series, previously known as Super Smash Con. This adoption, along with the support of LumiRank, is going to go a long way to establish this unified NA stage list as the stage list for North America. But it's not as cut and dry as you may think. There were a lot of responses to the stage list, and most of them were negative. But what do you all think of it? Before we go any further, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Give me your unbiased, genuine take on the list, now having seen it and the reasoning for yourself. But to wrap up this video, I want to take an in-depth look at the biggest piece of criticism that this list has accrued: the fact that it's undermining the Midwest Unified rule set. I want to compare and contrast the two, and take a look at what this means for the Smash community. I showed you this image earlier on in the video, but before I was pointing out the top part, which shows how much of the USA uses the Midwest Unified Stage List. But now I draw your attention to the bottom, which is the rule set itself. First, the similarities. Both rule sets use character first, and both rule sets actually have the same exact stages, just organized in different ways. The main difference is that Final Destination and Hollow Bastion have been moved to counterpicks, with PS2 and Smashville being moved to starters. There is also the fact that the Midwest Unified uses 3 bans and no DSR, which is important against characters like Kazuya, since in Midwest Unified you can ban Kalos, FD, and Town, the 3 flat stages. On the Unified NA rule set though, if your opponent hasn't won on any of them, you can only ban 2 of the 3, meaning that no matter what, Kazuya basically gets an FD-like stage for free. Same goes for Min Min or any other character that benefits from a flat stage. But the main problem with the NA Unified Stage List versus the Midwest Unified Stage List is the fact that in an attempt to give America a single unified rule set, the team behind this list has actually done the exact opposite and fractured us more than ever before. The Midwest Unified Stage List was already in the process of becoming the dominant stage list across the entire USA. It's being used, at least partially, in over half of the states, and is rapidly spreading even further each and every day. But with this, our best chance at a unified rule set has been usurped by a new contender, bearing the support of Lumirank, the biggest org in Smash. So now the situation has evolved. Before, we had a ton of little rule sets in America competing with the slightly larger but much more dominant Midwest Unified rule set. Given some time, I think it would have eventually triumphed over these smaller rule sets. But now we have 2 big competitors, NA Unified and Midwest Unified. One is already established, already tried and tested and proven to be good. The other is completely untested, but has already been adopted by several super majors without even having been used before, simply because of the backing of Lumirank. And might I add, the language that this write-up uses is quite tone-deaf. To directly quote the write-up, Ultimate has finally achieved a unified competitive rule set for North America. This significant milestone comes 5.5 years after the game's release, bringing consistency and fairness to tournaments across the continent. The assumption that just the release of this stage list would immediately bring about a unified competitive rule set is just presumptuous, and even goes against the original intent of the rule set that I mentioned earlier, that is, TOs going and testing it before coming back with critique. But this statement is just worded like they really do want everyone to just blindly adopt it. It's borderline condescending. And the ironic part is that of course all of this would come from the Midwest. It's just another episode in the very long history of Lumirank and their affiliates completely forgetting or ignoring the Midwest entirely. Out of the 20 TOs that were on the panel who voted for this, only 2 of them were from the Midwest, which is a pretty big problem when you consider that the main competition for this rule set is from there. Right now, it's the rankings versus the Midwest, and it feels like American Smash has been that for a long time. It's honestly quite annoying. But allow me to end on this note. While I heavily disagree with the treatment of the Midwest Unified rule set, especially in regard to the wording of the write-up and underrepresentation of Midwest TOs in the creation process, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm against this NA Unified rule set. I actually think this rule set is pretty good, but is it better than Midwest Unified? Well, dear viewers, are you ready for my hot take? Which do I think is better, the Midwest Unified or the NA Unified? Which rule set should you support? Drumroll please. RisterMice's take on the rule set discourse is... I don't really care, actually. Listen, I'm kind of just over all of this. To me, the rule set discourse is very similar to Steve Ban discourse. I just want whatever option gets us closer to a global unified rule set and stage list. That's my top priority. With the Steve example, Steve is legal in 90% of the Smash world right now, basically only being banned in a few states, mostly in the Midwest, funnily enough. Personally speaking, even if I thought Steve was deserving of a ban, which I'm still not really sure about, I still think he should probably be unbanned from the places he's currently not allowed, because it will get us closer to a global rule set. So with this stage list discourse, I'm gonna be plain honest with you all. This might seem somewhat shallow of me, but I'm just gonna support whatever rule set eventually wins out over the other. Sure, I do play the game at locals, but competing is the side hustliest of side hustles hassles to me. I'm much more concerned with having the rules of the game be as consistent as they can be across the entire globe. So yeah, my hot take is that I don't really care, and I'm just gonna wait to see which one the majority of the US goes with. And only time will tell which rule set prevails over the other. As far as today goes though, that's going to be it for today's video. Before I go, shout out to my patrons at Laster, Farsco333, Logan S, Persipalm, Wawa, Mr. Sinister, Happy Feet, Oshman, Mistybot, and my Tootsie patrons Iltis, Diamond Blaze, and Ben L. Additionally, shout out my YouTube members ZChar Jr., Defective, Boston R, Speed, Kirby Fan, Nexus, Okosoka, and my Tootsie members Mike G, Wu-Tang Forever, and Stormtrooper. Lastly, extra special thanks to my tier 3 supporters, Fat Blizzard, who says Big Deal make it out of his slump, Avadoon, who says Mr. Rice did the Go to Smash content, Iltis, who says M. Cleo always comes back, and Grant I Am. If you want to support me using any of these methods, links are in the description down below. Don't forget to use my coupon code RISTER in order to get 10% off of any order from Into the AM. And lastly, I want to give one last sincere thanks to Let Me Fly for their continued support of my channel. Link to their Twitter page is also in the description. Don't miss tomorrow's upload. But until then, I've been RisterMice, and thank you all so very much for watching.
I never felt like I never felt like